Terry, tell me the basis of MS. I don't know if we've covered that.
Sure.
And then that would be really helpful because now you're talking about the drug therapies that you've been experimenting.
Yeah.
So I want to just make sure people understand at the very cellular, simple level what MS is, multiple sclerosis.
So MS is a neuro-immune, so an immune problem that's happening in your brain, in spinal cord, and cranial nerves, in my case, that the nerve's not functioning properly. We know there are episodes of acute flares of disease, that's called a relapse. And then generally there's a gradual improvement, that's called a remission. On top of these episodes of acute worsening and improvements is this background of slow, relentless deterioration. That's the neurodegenerative component. And so in retrospect, if you call these little flares of trigeminal neuralgia, electrical face pain, was that a relapse? Maybe. Aside from that, I had the dim vision, that was clearly a relapse. I had the episode of the weakness of my right hand, that was clearly a relapse. But the other thing that was happening was I was getting weaker. My core muscles were less strong. It was harder to walk. It was harder to sit up. And I could no longer sit up in a regular desk chair. I couldn't sit at a table to eat. I had to lean back in a zero gravity chair. When I was staffing residents at work, I couldn't sit at the desk at a special zero gravity chair where I could lean back with my knees higher than my nose. Gravity, holds me entirely in the chair. And I was really quite fortunate, even though I had really severe fatigue, I was mentally clear. And I'm sure that was very beneficial being a physician, doing all the reading, and continuous learning that we do, was at least somewhat protected. But it was also clear, Ailey, that the frequency and severity of the electrical face pains continued to worsen. I was finally taking daily gabapentin, which is a anti-seizure medicine, which can be very helpful for neuropathic pains, and that was helpful. And then when I had breakthrough pain, despite taking the maximum dose of daily gabapentin, that was incredibly distressing to me. Like, okay. In 2007, Ailey, I was coming to terms with, it's very clear I'm going to be bedridden by my illness because, it's harder and harder to sit up. I'm beginning to have some brain fog. Like, I'm going to become probably demented. But I'm probably also going to have my electrical face pain turn permanently on. And to give your listeners and to you context of what I was enduring, I'm a farm kid, so we use these cattle prods with electrical, shock sticks to get the cattle and the hogs to move, and they squeal and they scream and they run away because the electrical pain, it's really quite profound. So it's sort of like a cattle prod was hitting me right here or right here. I get this intense electrical jolt, and I have this involuntary grimace. I try really hard because I'd be trying to work in the midst of all this, so I try really hard to not grimace, but eventually I couldn't control that, and it'd be just for an instant. Now, in comparison, I've had broken bones, much more intense than a broken bone. I've had surgeries, much more intense than post-op pain.
You had pregnancy.
I had labor, active labor, much more intense than active labor.
Right.
And at its peak, when I get the jolt of pain, it overwhelms all of my other sensory inputs. So the world becomes white, for instance, because I can't see. I'm blinded by pain. And when it's on and active, I'm getting the jolts. A breeze on my face will trigger the pain. A bright light would trigger the pain. Sound, the dog barking would trigger the pain. Chewing triggers the pain.
Mm.
Talking triggers the pain. Swallowing triggers the pain. And I also know that that the natural history of having trigeminal neuralgia with MS is that it eventually turns on continuously.
Mm.
And when that happens, people themselves, because all of their sensory input becomes this intense electrical pain. And so I had, this is a big conversation to have with my spouse, was that I rewrote my durable medical power of attorney so that if I stopped speaking and stopped swallowing, there'd be no IV fluids, no tube feeds. And so I had to rewrite my durable medical power of attorney. I rewrote my living will. I was like, okay, it would be extremely painful last, 10 days, 2 weeks while you wait for dehydration to finally make you comatose and let you die. But the end would eventually come.
Right.
And in 2007, I could not sit up. I was still able to go to work. I could be in the zero gravity chair. My chief of staff, and actually, I think he was entirely right to do this. He had called me in July to say he's assigned me to the traumatic brain injury clinic. And he described the job. I'd be part of a multidisciplinary team. I'd be doing the primary care for these vets who'd had a traumatic brain injury and were having persisting symptoms. And I'd have to do the exam, write the notes. There'd be no residents. And as he described the job, I'm thinking, physically, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I came home and told Jackie, and she said, there's no way you can do that. I said, yeah, I know. And so in January, I'm going to go to this clinic, and either I can do the job or I can't, and then I have to apply for disability. But, I think God was whispering in John's ear, because 2 weeks after I got that, very tough meeting, I got to review a research study that I was reviewing for the institutional review boards, and that's the committee that reviews clinical trials to be sure that they'll all be safe and appropriate.
Right.
And they were using electrical stimulation of muscles in a clinic where people had a traumatic spinal cord injury. So I thought, wow, that sounds really interesting. I wonder if that could help me. So I do a quick PubMed search. There's only 212 articles. Like, okay, it took a while to get through all those abstracts. And so then I wanted to buy my own device. And Jack said, no, honey, you can't do that. But let's talk to your physical therapist. And fortunately, the physical therapist I was seeing had an athletic practice, and he used E-Stim. He goes, this hurts a lot, Terry. I can grow you bigger muscles, but I don't know that your brain can talk to those bigger muscles. I might be making it harder to walk. But he let me have a test session. He's right, it hurt really bad. But when it's over, it just did such wonderful stuff for my mood. So
the endorphins you talk about.
Endorphins, yeah. I said,
yeah. That's amazing. And so did you try acupuncture? Because when I think of electrical stimulation, I think of the meridians and I think of some of that work. Did that ever come into play at that time? Or
not that time, but I did eventually decide, you know what? Mm-hmm. Let's give that a whirl too. So I did try some acupuncture as well. And so I did the E-Stim. Mm-hmm. At the same time that I was discovering E-Stim, I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I took their course on neuroprotection, which, by the way, was, I really loved. It was a lot of mitochondria, a lot of biochemistry. It was really hard because I remember I'm having some brain fog here. But I now have a longer list of supplements.